Says 2 Samuel chapter 10, starting in verse 9, the Bible says, when Joab saw that the front of the battle was against him, before and behind, he chose of all the choice men of Israel and put them in array against the Syrians. And the rest of the people he delivered into the hand of Abishai his brother, that he might put them in array against the children of Ammon. And he said, if the Syrians be too strong for me, then thou shalt help me. But if the children of Ammon be too strong for thee, then I will come and help thee. Be of good courage, and let us play the men for our people and for the cities of our God, and the Lord do that which seemeth him good. I want to begin this morning kind of with a little disclaimer, I guess, for the message. This year my theme has been the subject of where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And my idea for the whole year has been to take stories that have to do with the founding of our country and to use them as illustrations of things that we find in the Bible. And I've been doing that. I'm going to continue to do that. But I do feel like every once in a while I need to remind you, I don't think that America is the New Testament answer for Israel. I don't think that that's the case. I do not think that Israel was Old Testament and America is New Testament, that America is the same as Israel, and that everything in America is wonderful and dandy and all of those kind of things. And in fact, I tend to think American Christianity really is Protestant Christianity, not Baptist Christianity. And we as Baptists have some reason to be concerned about not only what's going on in our world today, but really some of the foundation of our country. There are some things that I think are concerning, even in our history, spiritually and so forth. I don't think that our country was one time this wonderful Christian nation, and then we got to take back our Christianity. And so I don't think that that's the case at all. I think our country has always teetered on the verge of just being a religious country, and there have been people who in this place, in this land, have been a lighthouse that have helped our country kind of be used to the Lord. So I don't think we're the replacement of Israel. But there is an interesting line of thought that I think the Bible teaches that begins with Israel and comes through the Jews to the Christians, through the Christians through Europe all the way to the British Isles and to England, and then from England to America, this theme of liberty. Jesus said in John chapter 8 and verse 36, Jesus said this, if the Son therefore shall make you free, ye shall be free indeed. And the reason why I got kind of confused there is because verse 32 says, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And so I had to, all of a sudden in my mind, I didn't want to get those two mixed up. But in verse 36, he says, if the Son therefore shall make you free, ye shall be free indeed. And when you look through the New Testament, the subject of freedom is found throughout the New Testament. It's spoken of something we ought to seek freedom, liberty. We ought to seek it. We ought to use it for the glory of the Lord. But we ought to be careful that we don't abuse our liberty and so forth. It's a thing you find throughout the New Testament. I think you find it in the Old Testament too. And this same concept, I think God gave Israel this sense of independence as his people. And they passed that independence, that liberty on to the early Christians, who took it with them to the British Isles, to England. England, I think, was evangelized by Christians. I think there were Christians in England before the apostles were gone, before the apostles were dead. I think there were already Christians in churches in England, and that had this concept of that we were a free people. And so what kind of gave me this idea is because I over the last several years have been doing some studies of British history and American history. I've been doing them together, and because almost as long as we have a record of British history, they have been a people who have considered themselves free men. They've thought of themselves as free men. They've always had, they have a monarchy, and they've had it for centuries upon centuries. But even in the earliest days of their monarchy, they believed, not like in Europe, on the mainland of Europe, those monarchs were absolute monarchs. In England, the monarch, the king, always was servant to the people. They always thought he was a servant to the people. And so what happened when we come to America, then Americans thought of themselves, the early Americans thought of themselves as British citizens, and as British citizens they were free men. The king worked for them. The government was for them, not them for the government. They believed that that was true. They also believed this truth. They also believed that not only were they free men, but that the government was there to serve them, but that if the government ever tried to take their freedom from them, according to British history, they had the legal and moral right to overthrow that government and start over. That's why the Americans did what they did. The Americans weren't rebels, and every once in a while people will ask me this, and they'll come and say, well, you know, aren't you, when you promote America, aren't you promoting rebellion? I mean, those are people who overthrew their government, and that's rebellious. Aren't you promoting rebellion when you talk about, you know, America like that? And actually, they did not think of themselves as rebels. And while the British did consider them rebels, you got to remember why. Because England by that time had abused their authority. They were no longer thinking of the colonialists as free men. They were thinking of them as their slaves, as their servants. They are Americans. They are here to serve us who are British, and they thought that way. By the way, do you know that during the American Revolution that the majority of British citizens opposed their government's war against America? Most of the people in Britain even believed that the Americans had the right to overthrow the British government if they chose to do that. Anyway, so the whole point of this thing is not to America is the same thing as the Jews and all that. That's not the point. What I'm trying to do, though, is point out that there is a principle of liberty that God instills in His people that you can find all the way through Israel, England, through Israel, through the early church to England, and then to America. And so that kind of gave me the idea of how I'm approaching the messages that I'm bringing this year. And so, having said that, let me get into the message today. There's a battle. How many of you ever heard of the Battle of Oriskany? So it's a American Revolution, the Battle of Oriskany. I want to speak about that. It was August of 1777. It was just during the British campaign that's going to end in the Battle of Saratoga. Now, August of 1777, the British are making their way down under Gentleman Johnny Burgoyne. They're making their way down from Canada down through Lake Champlain, and there's an American militia headed up by a general, a militia general by the name of Nicholas Herkimer. And so he's received word, Herkimer, now remember, these are not soldiers, these are farmers, these are citizens, and they belong to, I can't remember the name of the group, but it was the Citizens Committee for Safety is what I think it was called. The Citizens Committee for Safety, something like that. And what it is they've just agreed as local citizens that if the need arises, we'll get together and we'll fight together for the public protection. And the leader of their Citizens Committee for Safety was Nicholas Herkimer. He was their leader. They're not soldiers, none of them, but they do practice, when they train so that they can do this a little bit. They practice a little bit, but they're not like, great soldiers and so forth. And Herkimer hears that the British are coming down through Lake Champlain. They're working their way toward them, and that there's a fort near them, an American fort called Fort Stanwix. It's now where the city of Rome, New York sits. And so there's this fort called Fort Stanwix, and there's a contingent of American soldiers at Fort Stanwix, and they are under siege by the British there. British going to take over their fort and so forth. And Nicholas Herkimer gathers together, he musters up 800 men, farmers and people around. He gathers together 800 of these citizens for the Committee for Public Safety, and gathers them together, and they're on their way up. They're going to try to help out the Americans that are at Fort Stanwix. They're on their way up to do this, and as they're traveling up that way, they're getting on, got their men, they're going up there, heading that way toward Fort Stanwix, and Herkimer receives word that they're going to, before he gets there, that they're going to run into a contingent of British soldiers, and he hesitates, he stops. And people got mad at him for stopping. In fact, still to this day, people debate about why he hesitated. There are a number of things that are interesting. The British contingent that he was going to meet, his brother, who was a loyalist, was in that other opposing force. And so some people say, well, he didn't want to meet him because he's going to have to fight his brother. And, he didn't want to kill his brother or his brother to kill him and that kind of stuff. Doesn't want that to happen. Some people say that it was that. Some people say, well, some people accused him of cowardice, because we're going to run into the enemy and he stops. And so people accused him of cowardice. And let me see, some people actually accused him of being a loyalist himself. And, he's pretending to be pro-America patriot, but really he's a loyalist and all those kind of things. So they kind of, they criticized him. Even at that time, he was criticized by his own men, these 800 men that are following him. They're criticized by him. It turned out that Herkimer's hesitations were pretty well founded, though, because as they advanced, not only did they run into the enemy, but they ran into an ambush. And he and his 800 men are ambushed. The British attacked Herkimer with about 500 British regulars and Hessian soldiers, and as many as 1,000 Mohawk Indians. So there's 500 soldiers, and then there's these 500 or so, something like that. No one knows exactly how many, but up to 500 Mohawk Indians are there. So he gets ambushed by them. Herkimer is almost immediately wounded. He was shot in the leg, and his next officer under him was Colonel Ebenezer Cox, and he was almost immediately killed. So the two main officers were either killed or incapacitated immediately. As soon as this ambush happened, they're in pretty bad shape. And the initial shock of this, so here's all these guys blaming Herkimer. You're a coward. You don't want to go fight the enemy. Except as soon as the ambush happened, all of his men, they broke rank, they scattered, and they're all just running, trying to save their lives and all this kind of stuff. Herkimer is wounded. Cox is dead. And they say this is what happened. They say, all these farmers, they're just going to try to go out. All they're planning on doing is go help take back a fort. And now they find themselves surrounded and ambushed and being shot at every side. And, they can't get home because, they're surrounded. So they're trying to run, but they can't run. And they say this is what happened. Herkimer, who is now shot, by the way, he's going to die from his wound. Before this, it takes a couple of weeks, I think 5-10 days before he dies. But they say that what he did when he got shot, Cox is dead, he ordered his men to lean him up against a tree, and that he sat down in the middle of a fight. He's surrounded by 1,000 enemies. That he sat down at a tree, pulled out his pipe, started puffing on his pipe and giving his men orders. And that what happened is that because he was so calm, the guy said, if Herkimer could do that, we might as well keep fighting, stop trying to run. And so, they started listening to him. If he had enough calm and enough boldness that even wounded so badly, he'd just smoke his pipe and give commands and orders, they decided they'd go ahead and listen to his orders and pay attention to what he was saying, which saved their lives, or saved them, really. Actually, a whole lot of them don't survive this thing, but the ones that do survive because of the calmness that he shows. Another problem that was happening early on in the fighting, because these are farmers and they've got those black powder, you got to ram the rod and all that kind of stuff. It was taking them like 15 minutes to load after they fired. Well, in 15 minutes, an Indian run up with a tomahawk and kill him. And so, this thing is going bad. It's looking bad. Herkimer's there, and it's looking bad. They're, being overwhelmed and so forth. His men are obviously outmatched with skills and so forth, and those kind of things. All of a sudden, and God did these kind of things all the time during the American Revolution. In the middle of this fight, a thunderstorm comes up. And I can't imagine that these kind of things happen, but a thunderstorm comes up, and so the British decide that they will have to wait until the storm is over to finish their ambush. How do you do that? You've lost the surprise of attack and so forth. And so they just say, hey guys, go find yourself some cover, and when the rain stops, we'll go ahead and start shooting again. And so for an hour, it's raining so hard that the British stop attacking, and the British and the Indians stop attacking. In that hour's time, Herkimer is able to reorganize his men to get him some lines so that they've got a battle line again. And then he came up with a new idea. A new battle fight, because they were so slow loading their guns. He said, let's do it this way. Let's fight in pairs. so that while one's loading, the other one's got a loaded gun. That way a Mohawk can't come up and take off your scalp. And so we'll work together in pairs, and so that they can win. Now, the battle, technically speaking, the Americans lost the Battle of Oriskany. And the reason for that is because of this, because their objective was to reinforce the regiment that is at Fort Stanwix, and they don't get that accomplished. They don't get that done. Technically speaking, they lost the Battle of Oriskany, but that can be debated. Because since they stood their ground, and by almost like out of the 800, 500 died. So that's not good. British didn't lose anywhere near that much. But here is why some people say no, the Americans won this battle. Because what happened is that the Indians were convinced, the British had convinced the Indians that all they'd have to do is run up and yell a couple of war screams, and the Americans had run, and that the Indians really wouldn't have to do any fighting. And it was the Battle of Oriskany where the Mohawk Indians said, I think these Americans are serious. And they stopped helping, for the most part, stopped helping the British at that point. And so they lost, the British lost, at least for the most part, lost one of their real allies here in the United States when they lost, because a bunch of farmers started fighting together. They paired up, working together, and one man was calm enough, he sat there and smoked his pipe while he's giving off orders, and they kept fighting, they stood their ground. It was the British, by the way, the other thing, the reason why the British couldn't be said to have lost is because the British were the ones who left the field. The Americans didn't make it to Fort Stanwix, but they weren't the ones who left the field. The British were the ones who said, we've had enough of this, let's quit. And the British were the ones who quit the battle and so forth. And today, Herkimer, he did die about, I think it's 10 days later or something like that. What happens so very often, it was a leg wound. They had to amputate his leg, and he died from complications of the amputation. He didn't die from bleeding to death or anything like that. It was from complications that happened because of his leg being amputated and all that. But today, a man who at one point they thought they were accusing him of cowardice. Today there is a county that is named after Herkimer, and there is a town that is named after Herkimer. And so a man who just had enough cool about him that in the middle of a fight sat down, pulled out his pipe, began giving instructions and orders to his men, saved the day for the Americans in that battle. The Battle of Oriskany reminds me of the passage that we're reading here in 2 Samuel in chapter 10, because of the cool that Joab is going to show in this passage. So we're going to go through this battle that we find in 2 Samuel in chapter 10. We're going to go through this passage of Scripture. I've got three things I want to point out to you today. Number one, first thing I want to point out is that this action that's going to take place in 2 Samuel 10, all of it happens because of someone who's got a critical personality. Let's read verses 1 through 7 here. It came to pass after this that the king of the children of Ammon died, and Hanun his son reigned in his stead. Then said David, I will show kindness unto Hanun the son of Nahash, as his father showed kindness unto me. And David sent to comfort him by the hand of his servants for his father. And David's servants came into the land of the children of Ammon. And the princes of the children of Ammon said unto Hanun their lord, Thinkest thou that David doth honor thy father, that he hath sent the comforters unto thee? Hath not David rather sent his servants unto thee to search the city, to spy it out, and to overthrow it? Wherefore Hanun took David's servants and shaved off one half of their beards, and cut off their garments in the middle, even to their buttocks, and sent them away. And when they told it unto David, he sent to meet them, because the men were greatly ashamed. And the king said, Tarry at Jericho until your beards be grown, and then return. And when the children of Ammon saw that they stank before the children of before David and the children, and when the children of Ammon saw that they stank before David, the children of Ammon sent and hired the Syrians of Beth-Rahab and the Syrians of Zobah, 20,000 footmen, and the king of Maacah, 1,000 men, and Ishtab, 12,000 men. And when David heard of it, he sent Joab and all the host of the mighty men. And there's going to be a fight now. And the fight is all because when David wanted to show kindness to Hanun when his dad died, Hanun's got some critical friends who got to say something negative. They just got to spout their mouth off about somebody. They don't know anything about what they're talking about, and they just got to run their mouth and see if they can't get trouble. And so here they are. David's just sending them some guys so that he can be a help to these people and trying to comfort Hanan after the hearing of his father's death. And these guys say, no, David isn't here to help you out, and he's not here to bring comfort to you. David's sending those men to spy on you. He's got you at a vulnerable moment. Your dad is dead, and you're taking over, and this is a great time for him to try to overthrow the land. And it's because of someone who's got a negative spirit, someone who's got a negative personality, someone who's got a negative mouth, that all of the problems happen that are going to happen. The bloodshed and all of the death and all of the hard feelings and all of the anger and all of the pain that happens in 2 Samuel in chapter 10 happens because someone spoke unkindly about another person. That's all it was. Everything that happens in this whole chapter happens because somebody spoke negatively or unkindly of another person. And rather than trying to be supportive or comforting, or rather than even just being quiet, they had to say something negative. They had to say something unkind. They had to see if they couldn't put a seed of dispute in this thing. And all of the problems that happen in this, there are people who are going to die in this chapter. There are nations that could have been friends who are now separated in this chapter. All because somebody decided to be negative rather than positive. And they were wrong. These negative people, isn't David here to come so he can't spy out the land and overthrow you? They're wrong. That wasn't at all what David's intention was. But it doesn't matter whether they're right or wrong or not. The damage they did by their negative words caused a problem that was undoable. That happens all the time. You'll say something and afterwards say, oh, I shouldn't have said that. But it doesn't matter that you shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry doesn't work once you've said something negative. Once you've cut someone's character, once you've criticized somebody, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it, doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work. It's once you said that negative thing is out there, and whatever damage it does, it can't be undone. It can't be reversed. And I just want to say this, don't be that person. Don't be that negative person. Learn how to speak kindly about others, or just don't say anything. Don't be that negative person. Learn how to say things that are kind, say things that are encouraging, say things that are helpful, or just don't say anything at all. Don't be that negative person. I think. Who cares what you think? If you can't say something kind, don't say anything at all. You don't have to have, if you don't have a good opinion, then don't have any opinion, but don't tear things down. All that negative talking, it just never does any good. It has no place. Now, I do understand that there are times when correction needs to happen, and correction takes a negative tone. It really does. But here's the thing. Here's the difference. When correction comes from someone who has authority to correct. If you aren't someone who's in a position to make a difference, don't say negative things. If you're not in a position where you can help a person and say, this thing in your life, it really needs to be dealt with. If you're not in a position where you can help that person deal with whatever it is in their life, then don't say the negative thing. Well, they just need to hear it. And there are people that God will put in their life that are there to tell them that and to direct them. But don't say anything unless you're there to help. Don't just say negative things because it's what popped into your head and it popped out of your mouth. Don't let those kind of things happen. James chapter 3 verses 3 through 10, the Bible says, Behold, we put bits in the horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn about their whole body. Behold also the ships, which though they be so great and are driven of fierce winds, yet are they turned about with a very small helm, whithersoever the governor listeth. Even so, the tongue is a little member, and boasteth great things. Behold, how great a matter a little fire kindleth. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members, that it defileth the whole body, and setteth on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire of hell. For every kind of beast, and of birds, and of serpents, and of things in the sea is tamed, and hath been tamed of mankind. But the tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. Therewith bless we God, even the Father, and therewith curse we men, which are made after the similitude of God. Now, did you hear what he said? Okay, we say we love God, but then we tear down someone that God loves, that's made in the image of God. One out of the same mouth proceedeth blessing and cursing. And then he ends with these words, I think it's probably the most powerful phrase in this entire portion of Scripture. He says, my brethren, these things ought not so to be. So he's saying, here's the tongue. I mean, we can tame a horse, we can steer a ship, we can, control animals, but the tongue. I mean, with this tongue we bless God and curse men, and he says, and it ought not be that way. But here's the sad thing is it is that way. Even in James' day, it is that way. And that's the whole point of what he's talking about here. It shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that a person can say, I love God and hate people. It shouldn't be that a person can say that I am a fellowship, that I'm a believer in the Lord, and yet cut down his brothers and sisters in Christ. It shouldn't be that way, but it is. It is that way. It is that way. And it shouldn't be, but it is that way. I know people who have quit gambling, quit smoking. They've repented of immorality and promiscuity. They have recovered from laziness and greed and all those kind of things. But I know very few people who will even admit they have a problem with their tongue. People who can, they can see all kinds of things in their life. They become believers, get saved. They can find all kinds of things. They see all these things in their life that they need to deal with and correct. And you can see them, their life turning around and changing. But over the years, I have seen very few people who are even willing to admit that they have a problem with the things that they say and with the damage that's caused by their tongues, and just not willing to admit it. Another American Revolution story, 1778. So 1777 is the British coming down, Johnny Burgoyne bringing the British down through Lake Champlain and the Battle of Saratoga and all of that kind of stuff. That's 1777. And what happened is at the Battle of Saratoga, America won that battle so significantly that the French decided that the Americans could possibly win this War of Independence, and so the French agreed to step in and help. So the French were over there; they're already in a war with England. Even at that time, they're in a war with England, but they're not. And America's thinking, well, we can win this war if France will come and help us, especially with the Navy. We've got a chance of winning this war with the help of France, but France wouldn't commit; they wouldn't help. And part of the reason was because everyone thought of Americans as being, they're second-class Europeans. They're not educated as well. They're not as refined. They don't have the skills. They're not disciplined like the Europeans are. And everyone thought that what had happened is the Americans, even the French, the Germans, they all thought the same thing. They all thought that what happened is the Americans would shake their fist like this, and as soon as the British pulled out a gun, they'd all run for the hills and say, I'm sorry, we're sorry, and give up, and they'd just let England run them over. And everyone thought that, and so France wasn't willing to get into the war helping America if the Americans weren't going to fight, if the Americans weren't going to do this thing. And so, but the Battle of Saratoga changed that. It convinced the French that the Americans really could fight the British. That they could get into a field of conflict, they could get into a field of battle, and they could hold their own against the British. And once the French saw that, they came to the place where they said, okay, well, if we help the Americans, they do have a chance of winning this war, and then we'll have another economic ally. We can trade with them and those kind of things, which was kind of what's going on. So that's all 1777. The French agreed to come and help. 1778, the French get there. All right. So now they've agreed to help, but it takes you don't just those days you don't just fly over in 8 hours, or something like that. So it's going to take them some time to get there. And so it's 1778 when the French finally get there. And when they get there, the first battle, cooperative battle between where the Americans and the French are going to work together against the British is going to happen. It's called the Battles for Rhode Island. It's going to happen in Rhode Island, and they're get together. And the French admiral in charge was a guy by the name of Comte d'Estaing, and it's not. I keep wanting to say D'Estaing, but it's not D'Estaing. It's d'Estaing. So anyway, so that's the Frenchman. His name is d'Estaing, who's in charge of the French, and then the American general that was in charge was a guy by the name of John Sullivan. And Sullivan, in those days, they would do this. The Congress would get together and they would just elect someone to be an officer. You know, if you had money, you didn't even have to have any military background or skills. Well, they just say, you know, if you're, as long as you've got money and you're a man of property, a gentleman, they'd want people who were gentlemen, had land and so forth, and then they would just vote you in to be an officer. And I don't know how they decided who got to be what officer, you know. So, and Rhode Island, interesting. The guy who primarily financed the Americans. The American Continental Army at first was John Hancock, the wealthiest man in America at the time, who wanted to be the general that George Washington wanted George Washington's job. He didn't get George Washington's job. He got to be a colonel at this Battle of Rhode Island. He didn't get, I mean, the guy who's paying for everything, and he doesn't even get to be the general at Rhode Island. He's got a general over him. And the general that they elect is a guy by the name of John Sullivan. And so now the French are going to work together. D'Estaing and Sullivan get together and they figure out a battle strategy. And they're going to do this thing. They're going to meet at a certain place and they're going to attack the British on a certain day. There's a certain time that they're going to attack the British. And there's some little bit of, you know, kind of jockeying going on. The French looked at the Americans and said, these bunch of rebel rouse, they don't even have uniforms that match. You know, so, I mean, like that mattered. You know, to them, you know, the French, they were all spit and polish, beautiful suit uniforms. The Americans didn't even have outfits that matched, and the French said they could never fight. Look at them, they don't even know how to dress for war. And so they, you know, there was all that kind of stuff going. Well, anyway, so John Sullivan decides they're supposed to start this battle on a certain day, and Sullivan decides to start without the French. I don't need their help. I can do it myself. Nah. They think our uniforms will show them that you can fight without a uniform. Well, you know what happens? The French, D'Estaing gets mad. They wouldn't, I mean, he didn't wait for us. It wasn't quite like that, but that, I'm kind of, you know, I'm preaching, I get to kind of imagine a little bit. Anyway, but what happens is, when Sullivan starts the battle, Sullivan, by the way, John Adams will later say, it would have been good if the first cannon fire by the British had taken his head off. That's what Adams thinks of Sullivan. It would have been good if he had died with the first shot. Anyway, so the battle, and the French don't help the Americans. The French, they just take their boats and sail away. Well, fine. If you don't think you need our help, then we're leaving. And they took off. They left. They got in their boats, all of their little French soldiers got in their boats, and they sailed away for a whole year. They weren't around it was next year. It's the next year before they can get them convinced to come back. They go down to the Caribbean, and they just stay down there for a year, you know, buying sugar and those kind of things. Just stay down there for a year. Well, the Americans, of course, they get the stuff and whipped out of them at Rhode Island, which makes... Oh, and I guess I got the stories mixed up. All right, I got a little bit ahead of myself. Okay, so they sail away. The French sail away. They go down to Boston. Okay, the Americans lose at Rhode Island. And after the battle is over, Sullivan, now he wasn't the only one. There were some other soldiers that, you know, said, boy, the French should have helped us, and, you know, they weren't there, and why weren't the French there, and those kind of things. But Sullivan went on a public campaign to dishonor D'Estaing. He began a smear campaign against the admiral. He is a dishonor to his countrymen, doesn't deserve, and he goes in. In fact, there were all kinds of things that the Continental Congress actually, you know, stopped Sullivan and said, you can't say things like this. You know, you can't do this. You can't put this in the paper. You can't write these things, publish these kind of things. You can't do that. But he does enough of it that the French sail away down to the Caribbean, and they're gone. And here's why. So that's 1778, and I said it was a year. It's not a year. The French do not return to help the Americans until 1781, before the French came back to help. When they came back, when they came back in 1781, the war was over in just a matter of months after they got there. Think about how many thousands of people died between 1778 and 1781 because one man couldn't keep his mouth closed. Because Johnny Sullivan got upset. Even if D'Estaing did the wrong thing. And I don't know. I mean, there were commentaries went both ways on the things. When either way you want to look at it. But even if he did the wrong thing, D'Estaing, by taking off like he did and so forth, still to cause an international separation because you just got your feelings hurt and you want to run your mouth and vent for a little while. I mean, that doesn't do any good at all. Think of the thousands of men who may have survived the Revolutionary War, had Sullivan just forgiven and kept quiet and worked things out instead of running his mouth like he did. And I'm just saying, don't be that person. This whole thing, 2 Samuel chapter 10, this entire chapter is here because somebody because one of the Ammonites says a negative thing, casts a negative word about King David to his king, and causes all that problem. Just don't be that person. Don't be that negative person. Don't be that person who just says negative things. Learn to say helpful, positive, kind things that tend to bring unity rather than disunity. Be that kind of a person. The second thing that I noticed now, okay, so that's all before the battle. The second thing that I want to speak about here is that I noticed is that, so now Hanan, the king of the Ammonites, he finds out David is mad, and he stinks in David's eyes, and that's not a good thing. And so, but he says to himself, yeah, I think I'm going to need a little bit of help in this thing. And so he hires people to help him in a battle against King David. Look at verse 6, 2 Samuel chapter 10 and verse 6. And when the children of Ammon saw that they stank before David, the children of Ammon sent and hired the Syrians of Bethrahab and the Syrians of Zobah, 20,000 footmen, of King Maacah 1,000, and of Ishtab 12,000 men. This thing doesn't look good. All right. So now there's this argument between the Ammonites and the Israelites, but now some other people get involved in it too. And this thing's starting to escalate into a big problem. Here's one of it always happens like this. You get this little disagreement going. If you don't get it taken care of, if you don't go talk it out and get it solved and resolve the thing, things like this can turn into really big issues. And so now other people get involved in this. And so the enemy of David hires helpers to help him in his contest against King David. Very seldom will you find that this world is friendly to our cause as believers. Less seldom will you find that when they attack, they're not friendly to us, and when they attack, they don't do it in very gracious ways. They look for ways when they're going to attack Christianity, they try to do it with everything in them. They want to completely get you. They want to completely run you down. And so David sent Joab. Now there's going to be a battle, and David knows it. He hears that Hanan has put together other nations, the Syrians, to come and help him in this battle. And so David takes Joab is his general, and sends his army to do what is their job to do. They are the people whose job it is to defend Israel in times of conflict like this. But the job is not going to be an easy one to do. It's not just the Ammonites, it's the Syrians also. And so in verses 8 and 9, the Bible says the children of Ammon came out and put the battle in array, and at the entering end of the gate, and the Syrians of Zobah and of the Rahab and Ishtab and Maacah were by themselves in the field. And when Joab saw that, he says this, when Joab saw that the front of the battle, it was against him. This isn't, sometimes a guy looks and says, okay, I think we've got this one, fellas. But no, he looks at this and he says, this thing's against us. The odds are not in our favor. The advantage is not ours here. When Joab saw that the battle was against him before and behind, he begins to make some orders and put things together. I am very thankful I get to live in the United States of America. I love our country. I love the freedoms that we enjoy and have enjoyed here. But the fact is, our country is going downhill very, very fast. And we are a nation filled with people who believe that they are entitled to a living and entitled to government handouts and entitled to live as they please without consequences for it. And that same kind of spirit seems to me to be filtering into our churches, so that even the average Christian turns tail and runs if the going gets hard as a believer. We're not faithful like there was at one time. We're not faithful to the house of God, not faithful to services, not faithful to the things of God. And I just wonder, where are the Christians when it comes to time to go out on visitation? And where are the Christians when the church calls for a work day? And where are the Christians when there is a Sunday school class that needs a teacher? And where are the Christians who will work the bus routes or pray for the destitute or help those who are fallen? Where are the believers who will take on the hard work and the hard jobs of Christianity? Where are the believers who'll just do what needs to be done, even when it's not an easy thing to do? And I think we've got this kind of entitlement Christianity spirit today. Well, I'm entitled to a soft seat, and I'm entitled to an air-conditioned room, and I'm entitled to a pastor who, can do this, and I'm entitled to this, and I'm entitled to that, and I don't want to accuse anyone because, I can't know the hearts of anyone at all, but I know that when the battle seems against them, some people are looking for an easier way than Christianity has provided them. And we just need some folks. So Joab, here he is. Now Joab's not what I would consider a strong character. In fact, I think this is interesting. When David's 37 mighty men, both of Joab's brothers are mentioned as Joab's brothers. But Joab is not one of the 37 mighty men. He's the general. He's going to do a pretty good thing right here. But when David gets ready to die, he comes over to Solomon, his son. He says, you don't want to trust that man at all. Amen. And so Joab is not a great character. But one thing I got to say for him, when he saw that the battle was against him, he didn't turn tail and run. Amen. Right. No, he's got a job to do, and he's going to do his job no matter how it's going to turn out. He's got a job to do. He's going to do the job that he is called upon to do. And I thank God for some folks that'll just stand up and say, you know what, Pastor, this isn't going to be easy, but I'm going to do this thing, and I'll take care of what needs to be done, and I'll be there. And there's some other things that I could have done. There's some other things that I wanted to do, but I'll be there, and I'll serve the Lord, and I'll do what needs to be done. I thank the Lord for that. So here this is. Joab sees, he gets out there and says, okay, well, this is going to be a little bit tough. This one looks pretty bad. There's a good chance we're not going to walk away from this one, fellas. There's that kind of a chance. And there's a chance we're not going to get away with this thing. And so when he sees what it is, Joab, this is my third point of the message, he just calmly creates a winning strategy. It's in verses 9 through 12. When Joab saw that the front of the battle was against him before and behind, he chose all of the choice men of Israel and put them in array against the Syrians. And the rest of the people he delivered into the hand of Abishai, his brother, that he might put them in array against the children of Ammon. And he said, if the Syrians be too strong for me, then thou shalt help me. But if the children of Ammon be too strong for thee, then I will come and help thee. Be of good courage, and let us play the man for our people and for the cities of our God. And then he says, and the Lord do that which seemeth him good. He just calmly made a winning strategy. I was at Tacoma General Hospital earlier this week, and I was in an elevator. I got in this elevator all by myself. I was in there, and getting the elevator, you got to figure out all those buttons and which one. And there's one side is only for the doctors and staff, and I want to make sure I don't want to push buttons I'm not supposed to push and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm trying to figure all things out. And one of the things that I noticed is there's this sign that says, if in case of emergency, gives a series of instructions to do in the case there's an emergency on the elevator. And it's a list of instructions. But in this list of instructions, there are two words that are in capital letters. Keep calm. In case of emergency, keep calm. And I thought to myself, those are very good instructions right there, because the fact of the matter is, I'm not even in an emergency and I can't read all of those notes. If I'm in an emergency, the last thing I'm going to do is read that whole list of instructions right there. What I need to know is to keep calm. It's amazing what keeping calm can do. It's amazing what kind of power is within the grasp of a person who can just keep calm. calm in the middle of a troubled time and when things are going wrong. And so just learning how to keep calm and stay calm and those kind of things. Just amazing. There's another case of the illustration of how powerful is a calm spirit. So this is the American Revolution also, and I can't remember the year right now when this takes place, but there's a Scottish it's not a regiment, detachment. The British have this detachment of soldiers who are marksmen. They're led by a guy by the name of Patrick Ferguson. And Ferguson had invented in his day an early version of a repeater rifle. In a day when, remember, the Americans are taking up to 15 minutes to reload, Ferguson has invented a rifle that can be reloaded and fired 7 or 8 times in a minute. And it's a black powder. It's just got some kind of, I couldn't understand how it worked, but it's some kind. He's invented this gun, and he and his men have gotten good enough with this gun that they can reload this thing. They can fire it and reload it up to 7 or 8 times per minute. So they're getting ready for the battle. Oh, it's the Battle of Brandywine. So it's Brandywine, and so they're getting ready. The British are moving in, and you know how they did things like this in those days. They say, "Hey guys, let's meet up at Brandywine. We'll get in a fight in about what do you say, month?" Sure, yeah, a month sounds good to me. Let me check the calendar. And they talk about this, they put it together. And so anyway, so they're going to meet, and they're going to have a fight at Brandywine is what's going to happen. And so the British are getting ready for the Battle of Brandywine. The Americans are getting ready for the Battle of Brandywine. And the British have sent Ferguson and his detachment to do some scouting to get things. The British are going to send some officers. They're going to be looking at stuff. So they sent ahead of their officers who are going to be doing reconnoitering and work on this. They've sent Ferguson and his men to go ahead and make sure that it's safe for them to do that. Well, Ferguson and his guys come across 2 American officers. One of them dressed in a really fancy French uniform, and the other guy, he said at the time, was wearing a high-cocked hat. It turned out it's Lafayette and Washington. He didn't know it at the time. Ferguson didn't know it at the time, but there's these 2 guys. Anyway, and it's the Americans. They're reconnoitering the field too. So he sneaks up and he says, "Guys, let's get up. We'll put these guys out of their misery." Ferguson, he's got his guys, and they sneak up. And when they get in range, all of a sudden Ferguson says, this is his report a little bit later. He says he was overwhelmed with a sense of disgust. How can you kill men who are so calmly going about their business? And so what he does, he doesn't know it's Washington. At this point, he's not told for several days that he was wounded at Brandywine. He's in the hospital, and he finds out that it's Washington that he let go. And so anyway, he's overwhelmed with disgust and tells his guys, "We just can't kill him. We're not going to do this. We're not that kind of men. We're not going to kill men who have that kind of calm presence about them." And so he sits there. What he does is he calls out to Washington. He says, "Hey, you might want to get some distance between me and you." I don't know what he said, but I'm imagining, that's what I'd think you do. If you're not going to shoot a guy, at least get far enough away that I'm not tempted. And here's what he said he did. Washington, and he didn't know it was Washington at the time. Washington turned, looked at him, and then just slowly cantered off. Didn't scare him a bit. He said, "We could have pumped him full of bullets in the time that he gave us." And he just slowly cantered away. He said, "I yelled at him again." He turned and looked and just slowly rode off. Calmness in the middle of all of the trouble, and so we're just staying calm. And I tell these stories now. I got to find my place in my notes again. Okay, so so here's another calm story. Just do your thing. It's the Battle of Cowpens. By the way, Cowpens would have never had to been fought if Sullivan had kept his mouth quiet. If Sullivan hadn't got the French upset so that they left, it's very possible that the war would have been over before the Battle of Cowpens was ever fought. The 2 most significant, I guess there's 3 really significant battles in the American Revolution. The first one was Trenton. The next one was Saratoga, and then Cowpens is an excellent. Cowpens is down in the south. After the war, goes down to South Carolina area, and so it's down there. And what's happened is there's a guy, American soldier American general by the name of Daniel Morgan. He's got a small group of men. The British have them massively outnumbered. The Americans were led by a General Nathaniel Greene, who's only got a handful of men, and decided, since I don't have enough people to defeat the British, let's go ahead and divide up. So let's just split up. And he's got here's the strategy. His strategy is this: we're far outnumbered. We can't win them like this, beat them like this together. And so let's see if we can't get them to split up. We'll split up and see if we can't get them to split up. And so Daniel Morgan takes his men, a group of men, and he heads off into the woods. And what his goal is to get the British to go out chasing him. And they get out in the woods far enough, and then they can fight him out in the woods, and it works. And so he gets out there. So he gets him out there, and it comes to a place where Morgan decides it's time to do this thing. And so they're gonna have a fight. They're gonna fight at Cowpens, and it's an interesting Cowpens. Morgan sets up the battlefield himself. As the British are kind of chasing him, and so he sets up the battlefield himself, and he sets it up so that behind the Americans is a river. Americans can't retreat. Morgan says something. He says, I have found that a man will fight just about as long as is necessary. And then he'll quit. But you put him in a place where his life depends upon it, and you can count on him to pour his life out in combat. So he puts a river behind his men, so they got no way to get out of there. And so then he does this other thing that was a new military concept, and the British are coming up, and so what he does is he's gonna divide his guys up into, he's got three groups. He's got a set of sharpshooters. He's got these militiamen, and the militia, they're volunteers, and the volunteers are, all the war, through the war, it's been like this. With the militia run, the very first time, especially when they see the British with bayonets, as soon as they see the British, do a bayonet charge, they just break ranks and run, and that's what they do. They've done it every single battle up to this point. They've just done that. And then he's got a group of regulars. These are the disciplined men who, they know that they can't break ranks. And so Morgan says he decides that you just let a man do what he's good at and no more. And so he's going to set it up so the sharpshooter's going to be first. Their job's going to be to pick off the officers as they approach, and then after that will be the militiamen. And so he goes the night before the battle. Daniel Morgan rides into the militiamen camp, and he says, guys, listen, tomorrow I'm going to ask you to do me this one thing: shoot twice. And after you fired your gun 2 times, go on home, and we'll all count you a hero. That's all I'm asking you to do. Fire your gun 2 times, and then you can head for home, and we will all praise you as heroes. So the next day, that's exactly what happens. And the British are coming, and sharpshooters, they do their shooting, and their militiamen, they fire their two guns. They turn around and they're running they're heading for home. Well, when they started heading for home, the British decided, we just won this battle. They fix bayonets, and they do a bayonet charge, and they come over the hill and run into all the regulars, and are absolutely decimated. They lose like 3/4 of their army. In fact, what happens is most of them don't die. 3/4, most of them don't die. Most of them surrender. What happened is the British soldiers, when they came over the hill, saw the American regulars, they fell down to the ground. Historians say that it was probably a case of combat shock. They're hungry, they're tired, and now they see they're overwhelmed, and their body just couldn't go on, and they just collapsed to the ground and were taken prisoner. 829 of them just laid down. And were taken prisoner because a guy said, you know what, I'm not going to ask you to do anything more than you're able to do. But if you'll just do what you can, we'll count you a hero. That's all they asked of him to do. Just do what you can, and we'll count you a hero. Now I got to find my place in my notes again. All right, so here's what Joab does. Now, I've got to get back to the passage of Scripture. So Joab looks out there. He says, this thing is against us. We're not going to. So he very wisely comes a winning strategy. He very wisely puts together this strategy. He says, here's what I'm going to do. We're going to divide up the soldiers between myself and my brother Abishai. And my brother, he's going to fight against the Syrians. We'll fight against the Ammonites. I think that's the right order. That it might be the other way around. But Joab saw that the front hand of Abishai, his brother, against the children of Ammon. Now, Abishai's got the Ammonites, and Joab's going to take the Syrians. He says, here's what we're going to do. You, Abishai, you guys, you're going to go fight the Ammonites. We'll fight the Syrians. And here's the thing. If we need help, come and help us. If you need help, we'll come and help you. And then he says this to the guys. This is where Cowpens comes in. He says to the guys, he says, be of good courage. Just play the men. Just play the man. Play the men. It's not man, but just play them. Just act like men today. And let God have his way. And we'll trust God to do what's good. Just be in your place. Help each other when there is a need. Don't say negative things and that kind of stuff. And trust God to do the rest.